Commander Vex stared at the security footage for the third time, his four eyes blinking in sequence as he tried to process what he was witnessing. The human female, designation Mira Kane, sat slumped against the reinforced titanium wall of detention cell 7. Her right hand hung at an unnatural angle, 3 fingers clearly broken, the knuckles swollen to twice their normal size. "This should have ended it," muttered Security Chief Krell, his mandibles clicking nervously. "We calculated the pain threshold. We accounted for their primitive nervous system. The human should be incapacitated." Vex's tail twitched, a sure sign of his growing unease. 27 years of commanding the Galactic Research Station Omega, and he had never encountered a species quite like these, humans. They defied every logical calculation, every behavioral prediction model the Zephyrian Science Council had developed. Perhaps, Vex said slowly, we underestimated them. Again. The detention center housed 43 humans, all captured during what the Galactic Alliance euphemistically called a diplomatic acquisition mission. Translation, they had invaded Earth, taken samples of the dominant species, and were now studying them like lab specimens. Standard procedure for newly discovered civilizations. Usually it worked without complications. Usually. Dr. Thysis approached the observation deck, her elongated neck swaying with each step. As the station's chief xenobiologist, she had been studying human behavior patterns for 6 rotations now. Her findings were, to put it mildly, disturbing. "Commander," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant bad news was incoming, "we need to discuss the Kane subject. Her psychological profile is anomalous." Vex sighed, a sound that came out as more of a whistle through his respiratory slits. "Define anomalous, Doctor." "She shows no fear response to pain stimuli. Her cortisol levels remain stable even under extreme duress. And most concerning, her aggression indicators actually increase when she's injured." Krell's eyes widened. "That makes no sense. Pain is a deterrent across all known species. It signals the body to avoid further harm." "Not with humans, apparently," Thys replied, pulling up a holographic display of brain scans. "Their pain responses seem to trigger something they call adrenaline. It actually enhances their physical capabilities rather than diminishing them." The irony was not lost on Vex. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 star systems using calculated applications of psychological pressure and strategic intimidation. They were experts at breaking the will of resistance movements. They had perfected the science of compliance through controlled suffering. And here was this one human female, sitting in a cell with a mangled hand, humming what their translation software identified as something called a war song. "Sir," came a voice from the communications array. Technician Pole, a nervous youngster fresh from the academy, was monitoring human behavior patterns. "You might want to see this." The main screen flickered to life, showing multiple detention cells. In cell 12, a human male named Jake Morrison was doing something the computer translated as push-ups despite having 2 cracked ribs. In cell 19, an elderly human female called Rosa Martinez was fashioning what appeared to be a weapon from her meal tray. But it was cell 7 that drew their attention. Mira Kane had stood up. "Computer, increase audio pickup on cell 7, Vex ordered." The speakers crackled to life, filling the observation deck with a sound that made every Zephyrian present uncomfortable. Mira was laughing, not the desperate laugh of someone losing their sanity, but the low, confident chuckle of someone who knew something they didn't. "Oh, you beautiful, stupid lizards," she said, flexing the fingers of her uninjured left hand. "You really think breaking my right hand was some kind of master stroke, don't you?" She walked to the center of the cell, rolling her shoulders like a fighter preparing for a match. "Here's the thing about humans that your fancy computers probably didn't tell you. We're ambidextrous when we need to be. Adaptive. And me." She held up her left hand, making a fist. "I'm naturally left-handed." The silence on the observation deck was deafening. "She's been holding back," whispered Dr. Thys. The entire time she's been using her non-dominant hand to downplay her capabilities. Krell's mandibles began clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. But why? What tactical advantage does that provide? Mira seemed to sense their confusion, as if she could feel their eyes on her through the monitoring equipment. She looked directly at the hidden camera, her smile widening to show far too many teeth for comfort. "You want to know why?" she asked, as if responding to Krell's question. "Because the moment you think you've won, the moment you think you've broken us down to nothing, that's when humans become most dangerous." She began to pace, her movements fluid despite her injuries. "You see, pain doesn't stop us, it focuses us. It strips away everything unnecessary and leaves behind pure, concentrated intent. And right now, my intent is very simple." Vex felt a chill run down his spine, despite the climate-controlled environment. What is her intent? As if hearing him, Mira stopped pacing and looked directly at the camera again. "I'm going to get out of this cell. I'm going to free every human on this station. And then I'm going to have a very educational conversation with whoever's in charge about the concept of consent." The threat assessment algorithms immediately began recalculating. Red warning lights started flashing across multiple displays. The computer's synthesized voice filled the observation deck. "Alert. Subject exhibits escalating aggression patterns. Recommend immediate implementation of additional restraint protocols." Additional restraints? Vex laughed, though it came out as more of a bark. "She's locked in a cell designed to hold a Thurian war beast. The walls are 3 meters thick. The door requires a molecular key that only I possess." Mira had moved to the wall where the door mechanism was hidden. She placed her uninjured hand flat against what appeared to be solid metal. "You know what I did before your people grabbed me? I was a mechanical engineer, specialized in systems integration and failure analysis." She began tracing patterns on the wall with her finger. "Every system has a weakness. Every design has a flaw. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point and applying force in the correct vector." Dr. Thiss was frantically pulling up technical specifications on her datapad. "Commander, the cell door mechanism has 17 redundant security protocols. Even if she somehow identified the access panel she would need." A soft chime echoed through the observation deck. It was the sound of a door lock disengaging. "No," breathed Krell. "That's impossible." The heavy door to cell 7 began to slide open with a pneumatic hiss. Mira Kane stepped into the corridor, flexing her left hand like a pianist preparing for a concert. "Impossible is just another word for a problem that hasn't been solved yet," she said, walking toward the corridor camera with deliberate steps. "And humans? We're really good at solving problems." Emergency sirens began wailing throughout the station. Automated security protocols activated, sealing off sections and deploying defensive barriers. The main computer began broadcasting warnings in 17 different languages. "Sir," Paul called out, his voice cracking with panic, "she's not moving toward the exit corridors. She's heading deeper into the detention center." Vex watched in growing horror as Mira Kane walked purposefully down the corridor, her broken right hand cradled against her chest, her left hand trailing along the wall as she examined each cell door mechanism she passed. She's not trying to escape, he realized. She's going to free the others. The implications hit him like a plasma torpedo to the command deck. 43 humans. 43 beings whose species had just demonstrated an alarming resistance to their standard containment protocols. 43 members of a species that seemed to view injury as motivation rather than deterrent. "Initiate full lockdown," he ordered. "Deploy security drones to level 7 and contact the Science Council. Tell them we need immediate authorization for enhanced suppression protocols." On the screen, Mira had reached cell 12. She placed her hand on the door mechanism, that same confident smile playing across her features. "Hey Jake," she called out to the occupant. "Feel like stretching your legs?" Another chime. Another door sliding open. Jake Morrison emerged, cracking his knuckles despite his injured ribs. He looked at Mira's broken hand and shook his head. "They really don't understand us, do they?" he said. "Not even a little bit," Mira replied, moving to the next cell. "But they're about to get a very thorough education." Vex watched as cell after cell opened, each human emerging with that same unsettling expression of determined calm. They weren't panicking. They weren't running blindly for the exits. They were organizing. "Computer," he said, his voice tight with growing dread, "what is the probability of successful containment with current protocols?" The computer's analysis took longer than usual, processing thousands of variables and behavioral patterns. When it finally responded, the answer sent a wave of fear through every Zephyrian on the observation deck. Based on observed human behavioral adaptations and resistance to standard deterrent methods, probability of successful containment has decreased to 12.7% and falling. Rosa Martinez, the elderly human from Cell 19, had fashioned not just one weapon but several. She was distributing them to the other freed humans with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Dr. Thasis noted with growing alarm that the old female's movements displayed combat training that their initial assessment had completely missed. "They've been hiding their capabilities," she whispered. "All of them. This entire time they've been allowing us to underestimate them." Mira Kane had reached the center of the detention level. 37 humans now stood free in the corridor, and she was addressing them with the tone of someone accustomed to command. "Listen up," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the monitoring equipment. "We're not the first species they've grabbed, and we won't be the last. But we might be the first to give them reason to reconsider their methods." She held up her broken hand. "They think pain makes us weak. They think breaking us down will make us compliant. They're about to learn why humans conquered their own planet before we even figured out how to leave it." The group began moving as one unit, their coordination suggesting military or emergency response training that none of their files had indicated. They moved with purpose, but not toward the obvious exit routes. "Where are they going?" Krell demanded. Pohl's fingers flew across his console, tracking the group's movement through the station's sensor grid. "Sir, they're heading for the primary data core, if they reach it." He didn't need to finish. The primary data core contained not just the research gathered on humans, but detailed information about every species the Galactic Alliance had ever studied. Navigation charts, defensive capabilities, political structures, everything needed to expose their operations to the broader galaxy. "Deploy all available security forces," Vex ordered. "Stop them before they reach level 5. But even as he gave the command, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The humans weren't acting like prisoners staging a desperate escape. They were acting like a military unit executing a planned operation. And Mira Kane, walking at the front of the group with her broken hand and that unwavering smile, looked like someone who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. The real question, Vex realized with growing unease, wasn't whether they could stop the humans. The question was whether the humans had ever actually been captured at all. The security drones arrived at level 5, just as the humans rounded the corner toward the data core. 12 floating units, each armed with plasma disruptors and neural pacification beams, standard protocol for dealing with escaped prisoners. Nothing the Zephyrian military hadn't handled 1,000 times before. Mira Kane held up her left hand, and the entire group stopped moving. She studied the drones for exactly 3 seconds, then smiled that predatory smile again. "Marcus," she called to a stocky human near the back of the group. "You still remember your army training?" Marcus Webb stepped forward, examining the drone formation with professional interest. Electronic warfare unit, standard patrol pattern, probably running hierarchy combat protocols from about 15 years ago. "Outdated?" Mira asked. "Laughably so," Marcus replied. "These things have the same vulnerabilities as the training bots we used at Fort Campbell. Want me to demonstrate?" Vex watched in mounting horror as the human called Marcus pulled something from his pocket. It looked like a small metallic object, possibly part of the meal dispensing system. The human threw it with casual precision at the lead drone. The object struck the drone's sensor array with a soft ping. Nothing happened for 2 seconds. Then the drone's lights flickered, its flight pattern wobbled, and it crashed into the wall with a shower of sparks. Electromagnetic pulse feedback, Marcus explained cheerfully to his companions. Hit the primary sensor node at the right angle, and the shielding reflects its own scanning pulse back into its processing core. Causes a complete system overload. The remaining 11 drones immediately shifted to attack formation, their weapons charging with ominous whines. But the humans didn't scatter or take cover like any sensible species would. They spread out in a tactical formation. "Oh, for the love of all sacred void spaces," Krell whispered. "They're not prisoners, they're soldiers." Dr. Thiss was frantically analyzing the group dynamics through her instruments. "Commander, their coordination patterns are consistent with elite military units. Small team operations, specialized skills distribution, adaptive tactical responses." "Elena," Mira called to a woman with graying hair, "how's your throwing arm?" Elena Santos picked up 2 more pieces of debris, weighing them in her hands. Not bad for a former Olympic qualifier. She hurled both objects in quick succession. 2 more drones sparked and crashed. The remaining drones opened fire. What happened next violated every tactical manual in the Galactic Alliance database. Instead of seeking cover, the humans moved forward. They used the corridor walls, the ceiling fixtures, even each other as launching points and shields. They flowed around the plasma bolts like water around stones. Jake Morrison grabbed a fallen drone and used it as a club to smash 2 others. Rosa Martinez, the elderly female they had dismissed as harmless, demonstrated hand-to-hand combat techniques that made Krell's mandibles go completely still with shock. In 17 seconds, all 12 security drones were destroyed. "Status report," Vex demanded through gritted teeth. "All units neutralized," Pole reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "No human casualties. And sir, they're still heading for the data core." The humans resumed their advance, stepping over the wreckage of million-credit security equipment like it was sidewalk litter. Mira Kane paused to examine one of the destroyed drones, her engineer's mind apparently cataloguing its weaknesses for future reference. As Commander, came a new voice over the communications system. It was Lieutenant Zara from the upper levels. "We have a problem. The humans we didn't capture, they're not just sitting quietly on their planet." Vex felt his heart skip a beat. "Explain." "Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from the Sol system. It looks like, well, sir, it looks like they're building something. Something big." On the main screen, the group of escaped humans had reached the data core access chamber. The door was secured with quantum locks, biometric scanners, and lethal defense systems. It was the most protected location on the station, designed to keep out entire invasion forces. Mira placed her uninjured hand on the access panel and closed her eyes. For 30 seconds she stood perfectly still, apparently listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. "What is she doing?" Krell asked. Dr. Thiss checked her readings. Her brainwave patterns suggest intense concentration. "She's analyzing the system through tactile feedback, mapping the electronic pathways by touch alone." "That's impossible. The quantum encryption alone requires." The massive door began to cycle open. "Nothing is impossible," Mira said, looking directly at the camera again. "It just requires understanding the underlying principles and applying them creatively." The humans entered the data core chamber, where holographic displays showed the accumulated knowledge of 300 years of galactic exploration. Star charts, species profiles, technological assessments, military capabilities, and the crown jewels of Zephyrian intelligence gathering. "Tommy," Mira called to a young man who had been quiet until now. "You're up." Tommy Park approached the main console with the confidence of someone who had been born with technology in his hands. His fingers flew across interfaces designed for entirely different physiologies, adapting to the alien controls with frightening ease. "Their data architecture is actually pretty elegant," he commented as he worked. "Quantum encrypted, multiply redundant, isolated from external networks. Unfortunately for them, they're running it all through a centralized processing core." Data streams began flowing across the displays faster than any organic mind could process. But Tommy wasn't just accessing the information. He was copying it, redirecting it, and according to Pohl's increasingly frantic readings, transmitting it. "He's broadcasting everything," Pohl reported. "The entire database is being transmitted off station." "Block the transmission," Vex ordered. "I can't, sir. He's using our own communication array against us. Every time I try to cut the signal, he reroutes through a different system. It's like he mapped our entire network infrastructure in his head." Mira Kane was examining the species database, her expression growing darker with each entry she reviewed. 47 conquered civilizations," she said quietly. 47 species you've studied, classified, and suppressed." She turned to address the camera directly. "Here's what you don't understand about humans, Commander. We're not just another species for your collection. We're the species that fought each other for 10,000 years and still managed to cooperate long enough to reach the stars." The transmission was still ongoing. Pohl estimated that 90% of their classified data had already been broadcast to unknown recipients. "We're a species that invented nuclear weapons and chose not to destroy ourselves with them," Mira continued. "We're a species that saw an infinite universe and decided to explore it instead of hiding from it." She held up her broken hand again. "And we're a species that gets stronger when you try to break us." Tommy looked up from the console. "Download complete. I've also taken the liberty of installing a few modifications to their network security. Nothing destructive, just some improvements to their ethical subroutines." "What kind of improvements?" Jake asked. "Oh, just a little program that will make their computers refuse to process orders involving the capture or harm of sentient beings. Should make their job significantly more challenging going forward." Alarms began blaring throughout the station as the modified security protocols began taking effect. Weapons systems shut down. Transportation locks disengaged. Life support systems began prioritizing the welfare of all sentient beings on board, regardless of species. "This is beautiful," Rosa Martinez said, watching the chaos unfold on the displays. "They built a prison, and now it's setting everyone free." Vex realized that his worst fears were coming true. This wasn't just an escape, it was a complete systematic dismantling of their operations. The humans weren't just thinking one step ahead. They were thinking 10 steps ahead. "Sir," Lieutenant Zara's voice crackled over communications again. "Those energy signatures from Earth, we're getting a clearer picture now. It's a fleet, sir. A human fleet. And they're not heading for Earth." "Where are they going?" Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. "Here, sir. They're coming here." Mira Kane smiled that terrifying smile one more time. "You see, Commander, you made one crucial error in your assessment of human psychology. You assumed that capturing some of us would demoralize the rest." She gestured to her companions, who were now systematically shutting down containment systems throughout the station. "What you actually did was give us inside intelligence on your capabilities while simultaneously providing our military with a very clear target and a very personal motivation." The main display showed long-range sensor readings, dozens of ships moving at impossible speeds, bearing down on their location with obvious hostile intent. "The hand you broke was just one hand," Mira said softly. "But humanity has 8 billion hands, and all of them are about to knock on your door." Through the communications array, they could hear the humans throughout the station. Not just the 43 who had been in detention, but others as well. Humans who had apparently been aboard the station all along, posing as various service personnel and research subjects. "How many?" Vex whispered. Dr. Thess checked her scanners. "At least 200, sir. They've been infiltrating our operations for months. This was never about capturing us, Mira explained, as if she could hear his thoughts. This was about getting close enough to understand your technology, your methods, and your weaknesses. The broken hand was just theater to make you underestimate us. She flexed her supposedly injured fingers, which moved with perfect coordination. Amazing what a little theatrical makeup and practiced acting can accomplish. The approaching human fleet was now close enough for detailed scans. The ships were using technology that shouldn't have existed, materials that defied several laws of physics, and weapon signatures that made Vex's engineering background weep with inadequacy. Surrender, came a voice over the main communications channel. It was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to release all sentient beings in your custody and prepare to be boarded. Vex looked around his command center. His security forces were neutralized. His technology was compromised. His data was stolen. His station was effectively under human control. And the human female who had started it all was standing in his most secure chamber, looking at him through the camera with the expression of someone who had just finished a particularly satisfying chess game. "You know what the best part is?" Mira asked. "We're actually the peaceful ones. You should see what we do when we're really angry." The Terran fleet took positions around the station, their weapons powered but not yet firing. Boarding pods launched from the larger vessels, carrying what Vex could only assume were more humans with more impossible capabilities. Message from the fleet commander, Pol reported. "They're requesting a formal surrender ceremony." Vex looked at the destruction around him, at the humans calmly dismantling centuries of Zephyrian supremacy, but at the approaching fleet that had crossed impossible distances in impossible time to arrive at exactly the right moment. He thought about his 47 conquered star systems, his detailed files on inferior species, his certainty that the galaxy operated according to rules he understood. Then he thought about Mira Kane's broken hand and how she had used their own assumptions against them. "Pol," he said quietly, "send a message to the Galactic Alliance. Tell them we need to revise our assessment of human capabilities." "What should I tell them, sir?" Vex watched as human soldiers began flooding onto his station, their movements coordinated, their technology advanced, their intentions absolutely clear. "Tell them," he said, "that we may have made a slight miscalculation." On the screen, Mira Kane waved goodbye to the camera with her perfectly functional right hand. "See you around, Commander," she said. "Thanks for the education." The transmission cut out, leaving the Zephyrian command crew sitting in the dark, wondering how an entire galactic civilization had just been outsmarted by a species they thought they understood. Somewhere in the distance, Admiral Sullivan's voice could be heard over the station's communication system, giving orders with the casual authority of someone whose species had just announced their arrival on the galactic stage. And Vex realized that the age of Zephyrian dominance was over. It had ended not with a battle, but with a lesson in why you should never assume that breaking someone makes them weaker. Sometimes it just makes them more creative.